million gate in boxing history. At Boyle's 30 Acres, Jersey City, New Jersey, July 2nd, 1921. Scheduled for 15 rounds for the heavyweight championship of the world. Champion Jack Dempsey, challenger George Carpentier.
Up until the late 1950s, the three most popular sports in this country were baseball, horse racing, and boxing. In the roaring 20s, the two athletes that just blew everybody away was Babe Ruth and the heavyweight champion of the world, the Manasseh Mauler, Jack Dempsey. Jack Dempsey was born William Harrison Dempsey. And in 1914, he started his career as a professional fighter. He fought underneath the name of Kid Blackie. That's because his hair was jet black. A while later, he got the name Jack from an old fighter from the 1800s by the name of Jack Dempsey, nonpareil Jack Dempsey. He was a former world champion. Jack Dempsey rode the rails. I don't know if you know what that is, but he hopped boxcars. Sometimes he would go underneath the boxcars and strap himself in to go to one city to the next. And then when he got out, he'd go to these bars and they would have fights. And he would challenge just about anyone out there. Of course, as time went on, he got better and better. Then around 1917, he happened to be one of the best boxers around. He was challenging the big-time boxers. Then in 1918, right over here in Harrison, New Jersey, he challenged a guy by the name of Fred Fulton. Fred Fulton was a huge man, had an enormous reach. He was the #1 contender for the world title held by Just Willard. And the fight took place in Harrison, New Jersey, and it lasted 23 seconds. As Jack Dempsey knocked out Fulton, knocked him out cold. And he became the #1 contender. Then on July 4th, 1919, in what was the largest gate in boxing history at that time, just under 500,000, in Toledo, Ohio, Jack Dempsey knocked out Just Willard. He knocked him down 7 times in the first round. And then after 3 rounds, they decided he had enough. And Jack Dempsey was the heavyweight champion of the world. He defended his title twice in 1920. And you would think the two most popular athletes in the world would be Babe Ruth and Jack Dempsey. Well, Babe Ruth was popular. I mean, everybody loved the old Bambino, but not so much with Jack Dempsey. He wasn't popular at all. That's because back in the mid-teens, there was something called World War I. And while all the young men around the country defended our country, Jack Dempsey decided to stay home and box instead. He was known as a slacker, a draft dodger. People didn't like him. Now his opponent, Georges Carpentier, the Frenchman, he started his career even before he was a teenager. When he was 13 years old, he became the amateur champion of France. And then the next year, at the age of 14, barely weighed 100 pounds, he turned professional. He's one of the only boxers in history, there's only a handful, that boxed in every weight division. I know people might not know what flyweight is, but that is 112 pounds or under. And Carpentier only weighed about 100. He took his lumps in the beginning because at the age of 14, 15, he's going against grown men. But as he got bigger and he got more experienced, he got better. In time he was in the welterweight division, that's 147, he started winning national and European titles in the welterweight, middleweight, light heavyweight, and even heavyweight division. Fast forward in 1914. He was only 20 years old. There was such things as a white heavyweight champion at that time. because the heavyweight champion, the real heavyweight champion, was a guy by the name of Jack Johnson. And there wasn't a white person in the world that could beat Jack Johnson. So they decided to have a great white hope, trying to get somebody to challenge Johnson. So they made a white heavyweight title. Before that, they also had a black heavyweight title when a white person, so it's not unusual. But in 1914, Georges Carpentier won that heavyweight title by beating Gunboat Smith. Jack Johnson went to France just before that to defend his title. And Carpentier was in the ring at that time, but not as his opponent, but as the referee. He was only 20 years old. He was the youngest, not only the referee, but he was also the youngest judge. He was the sole judge of that bout between Jack Johnson and Frank Moran. And of course, he gave it to Johnson. Then he wouldn't fight again for 5 years. I should rephrase that. He wouldn't box again for 5 years, but he did fight. He went to World War I. He became decorated. He was a pilot, came back with 2 medals. He was popular before the war. Now he was worldwide. I mean, people loved the guy. Just about 5 years to the day, he returned to the boxing ring. He had a couple warm-up bouts. Then he challenged this guy by the name of Joe Beckett. Joe Beckett already had his name signed to meet Jack Dempsey for the heavyweight championship of the world. The only thing he had to do was get by the Frenchman. Well, he didn't. 70 seconds into that first round, Carpentier knocked out Beckett. And that was the first time that there was talk about Carpentier going against Jack Dempsey. This is still 1919. There was a promoter by the name of Cochran who wanted to make this match. In fact, he wanted to make it in June of 1920. But a little thing called draft evasion. Dempsey was put in court, and of course, the bout was turned off. Then late in 1920, early in 1921, there was 2 other promoters that joined the ranks. William Brady, he also handled guys like James J. Corbett and James J. Jeffries. And of course, the other one was Tex Rickard. And as time went on, the other 2 backed out, and Tex Rickard, who was the P.T. Barnum of boxing promoters at that time, or maybe he'd be Don King, the way Don King is now. This was what Tex Rickard was. And he needed backing, so he got backing from John Ringling of the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus. And he wanted to have that fight. He wanted to have that fight between the Frenchman and Dempsey, and he promoted it greatly. The draft dodger against the war hero. The gentleman against the hobo. The light heavyweight champion of the world against the heavyweight champion of the world. Good against bad. He wanted to have it in New York City. He wanted to have it at the Polo Grounds. Polo Grounds was a venue that housed the New York Giants and the New York Yankee baseball teams. Large enough. There's only one thing wrong. The governor of New York, by the name of Nathan Miller, wasn't a boxing fan. He said, there's no way that this bout is going to take place in New York. And then there was another thing, that there was a stipulation in the books that they could not charge over $15 a ticket. So of course Tex had to look somewhere else. He got offers from all across the country, and even outside the country. But he wanted to keep it in the metropolitan area. Then we had a governor in this state by the name of Edward Edwards. He said, why don't you come over here? We got 3 cities that would like to talk to you. One was Newark, one was Atlantic City, and one was Jersey City. And of course, people say 4th of July weekend. The fight was supposed to take place on July 2nd, 1921. That was on a Saturday. 4th of July was on a Monday. Down the shore, Atlantic City, here we come. Well, he met with all the townspeople in each group. And lo and behold, he said, when he came back, he said, I had never seen so much enthusiasm the townspeople in Jersey City, led by their mayor at that time, who we'll get into, Frank Hague. Frank Hague. Frank Hague was a boxing fan, believe it or not. In fact, in the 1890s, he even boxed in a gym. And he became actually a manager of an individual from Jersey City, New Jersey, by the name of Joe Craig. And he would always attend the fights at Madison Square Garden. So he wanted to fight. He wanted to fight in Jersey City. That's where he wanted it. And of course, Tex, he loved it because right across the river was New York. Years later, Jack Dempsey's manager, Jack Doc Kearns, stated in his book that your good mayor, Frank Hague, got $80,000 under the table. Are we surprised? At that time, there was actually 5 places in Jersey City to look at. Then it went down to 3. But Hague, he was smart. He wanted it down Montgomery Ave. It's called the Montgomery Oval. The piece of land was owned by John F. Boyle. He had 34 acres, not 30. He had 34 acres of land. And Tex, looked at the land. It was an old baseball field. They played minor league baseball in the 1890s, right there. But it hasn't been used in years. It was a dumping ground. All trash. Anybody that was in town, they needed to get rid of something, they just dumped it on this land. But Tex looked at it and said, he didn't see what it was. He saw what it could be. And then on April 28th, they started construction. And guess who was the contractors? Anybody know? No, it's not the Frank Hague. It's actually the governor's brothers. So everybody was making money. Have that happen today, I don't know. It wouldn't be too swift. Yeah, that's Jersey City. But they used over 500 carpenters, 400 laborers. They had a total of 2.25 million feet of lumber. That's 246 miles of wood. They used 60 tons of nails. In the beginning, they wanted to have a venue that seated 50,000. Then it went up to 75,000. Then it went up to over 91,613. That was the official thing. They had 9 weeks to build, counting clearing everything out and nailing everything up. They started nailing and bringing it in on May 11th of that year. And of course, the bleachers, the furthest one away was 312 feet away from the center of the ring, 34 feet up. Carpentier, he got $200,000 for the fight. And Dempsey got $300,000 for the fight. Hague hired over 2,000 police and fire department employees for security, another 600 ushers. Of course, you had to feed the people. So he hired Harry M. Stevens. Harry M. Stevens was the hot dog man. He had a company from 1887. And in 1901, he made the first hot dog at a ballpark at the Polo Grounds by accident. But guess what? He didn't sell one hot dog that day. Why? Why? Because the fire marshal wouldn't allow it. It was too much of a hindrance, too much of a risk to have fires. So what did they do? He had over 100,000 ham, chicken, cheese, and tongue sandwiches. I don't know what tongue. Old timers tell me, oh, that really tastes good. But I don't know. But that's what they had. They also had 50,000 bags of peanuts, 30,000 bricks of ice cream, 40 tons of ice. 9 a.m., the place opened up. And people start coming in. They had 18 entrances to go into the place. And this is the first time women really came to the fights. They claimed there was over 2,000 of them. Why? Because Carpentier was like a movie star. He had looks like a movie star. These girls loved him. But they had celebrities come in. You know, John D. Rockefeller, Henry Ford. You had Tom Mix with the big white hat, and Al Jolson. You had a slew of them all come in from all over the place. They came in from boats. They came in from cars, jetties, trolleys. And of course, this was the first fight, championship fight, that was going to be called on radio. A lot of people think it's the first fight ever called on radio, but it wasn't. First fight on radio happened a few months before that, on April 11th in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, when Johnny Dundee went against Johnny Ray. But this was going to be the first fight, a world title fight, that was going to go out to so many people, over 300,000 people. Then, like Paris, they weren't going to, you know, they couldn't hear it on the radio. So what did they do? They had military planes fly over Paris after the fight and blow out smoke. If it blew out red smoke, that means their man won. If it blew out white, he didn't do too good. The night before the fight, Dempsey, he stayed at a guy by the name of General William Oppenheimer, right on the corner of Jersey Street and Montgomery. And the kids, you know, were clamoring for, I guess, just to see Jack. And Jack would throw him candies and quarters and stuff like this. And the guy said, "Hey, let's let, you know, Jack get some rest." Then the day of the fight, Carpentier, he came over from a boat from Manahawkin, Long Island, Manahasset, Long Island. 9 o'clock in the morning, they start coming in. The fights, the main event didn't start until after 3. I know, 6 hours. Actually, the first preliminary bout started at 12. And right on time, that's when it started. But then everything seemed perfect. But then it started to rain. Not the way it is raining here, but but it did start to rain. And Tex Rickard, he got so nervous about it. He told the people, his name was J. Andrew White, who ran the RCA segment for the radio show, to go on the air right now. It was Frankie Burns against Paddy O'Grady. Paddy O'Grady, yeah. And then he had to make an announcement. Rain or shine, the fight will go on. Carpentier and Dempsey, no matter what. Of course, you have to have a referee. They didn't have to look too far, because one of the best referees in boxing at that time lived right in Jersey City, New Jersey. He actually refereed Carpentier's fight against battling Levinsky just in October of 1920, right here in Jersey City, when Carpentier took the light heavyweight championship of the world right here in Jersey City. And his name was Harry Urkel. Of course, you have to have a ring announcer. The ring announcer was Joe Humphreys. He got his start when he was a kid, selling newspapers at corners. Extra, extra, read all about it. Then he became a child singer, and he had a powerful voice. They said he was up in years. He wasn't even 50, so makes me feel good. But then, as time went on, the clouds started to go away, the rain went away. Semi-final bout that day was Gene Tunney against Soldier Jones. And Gene Tunney would stop Jones in the 7th round. And now it was time. It was time for the big bout. Both Dempsey and Carpentier came into the ring. They put a horseshoe of flowers around Dempsey. And then Joe Humphrey started introducing the people inside the ring, the mayor, the governor, and other people. Now it's time to introduce the fighters. At that time, they introduced the champion first. They introduced Jack Dempsey, the heavyweight champion of the world, weighing 188 pounds. And the crowd gave him a little rumble. But there was also people that yelled out, slacker, draft dodger. And years later, he said he didn't like that because, here he is in our country against a Frenchman, and they're rooting for the Frenchman. Then they introduced Georges Carpentier. And the place went wild. 172 pounds. They said he's a soldier. And white hats went up in the air. And Damien Runyon, an old-time sports writer, said he never heard an ovation so loud. And this was for the Frenchman. Then Harry Urkel brought them to the center of the ring, gave them the final instructions. Then Joe Banyan rang the opening bell. And Carpentier rushed out like he said he was, but he surprised everybody because they didn't think he would do it. He rushed out and tried to end it right away, but Dempsey just eluded him and took a little bit control of the fight. But in the 2nd round, Carpentier landed a right hand right around the cheekbone, and Dempsey staggered a little bit. I just think he might have been a little off balance. I don't think he was hurt, but the crowd just went roaring because Carpentier's big punch was the right hand. That's when he won all his bouts, with his right hand. And Carpentier was all over him. Later on, Carpentier would say he broke his left or right thumb with that punch. Well, Dempsey survived that, came back in the 3rd round, went to the body, went to the head. Then in the 4th round, did the same, and finally he dropped Carpentier.
And down goes Carpentier. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. He's up just in time. And Dempsey goes after him, and down he is again. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He's trying to get up. 8, 9, 10, and out. And Jack Dempsey remains heavyweight champion of the world.
And still the heavyweight champion of the world was Jack Dempsey. And the next day in the papers, just about every paper you can imagine, headlines, Dempsey knocking out Carpentier. But also, it didn't say how great Dempsey was. Most of the newspapers would say what a big heart the Frenchman had. He fought his heart out, the war hero. In fact, the American Legion put an ad out. Any soldier that can beat Jack Dempsey, they would give them $250,000. In the New York Times, they had 8 columns in the first page, front page. 6 of those columns was devoted to that fight alone. And every page inside that first section had something about the fight. Also on that front page, there was a little article. Hardie, the President of the United States, declares World War I is over. Imagine, they thought that fight, I hate to say it, more important than World War I. Carpentier, he went on to box some more. He lost his light heavyweight title the next year to Battling Siki. Then he lost to Tommy Loughran and Gene Tunney and Tommy Gibbons. Then in 1926, he fought his last bout, which he won. Then he retired, and he died at the age of 81. Jack Dempsey, he went on to fight another $4 million Gates. The Carpentier-Dempsey fight that contracted over $1.789 million. He fought until 1927. He would hold his title until 1926 when Gene Tunney would beat him. And in 1927, he fought Tunney again in the famous long count. He lived until 87 years old. He even owned a restaurant in New York City called Dempsey's. Boyle's 30 acres, well, it stayed around for a couple of years, until 1927. Had, I believe, 10 more shows. Willard Firpo show, draw another 75,000. Harry Wills, who was the best black fighter at that time in the 1920s, he beat Firpo. Another huge crowd. Benny Leonard fought there against Lou Tendler. Even the Cinderella Man, James J. Braddock, fought at Boyle's 30 acres. But then, 1927, the wrecking ball came down, and so did the venue. And Tex Rickard, he sold the wood, and it became a baseball field until 1952, when the Montgomery Gardens went up. And that stayed until 2015. I don't know what they're going to do about it now, but that's what happened. But that was the first $1 million gate. Now you might say, how, I just say this. In 1971, March 8th, 1971, Madison Square Garden, Muhammad Ali against Joe Frazier. That was $1 million gate. That was only the 9th one in history. There was only 9 up at that time. All those years. Dempsey fought in 5, Lewis fought in 3, and the Ali Frazier #1 at Madison Square Garden. That's how rare it was to have $1 million gate. But now we have $100 million gates. The prices are outrageous. But if you go back in history, there only could be one #1. And that happened right here in Jersey City, New Jersey, at Boyle's 30 acres on July 2nd, 1921.